Welcome to Time to Press Pause, real life stories from the C-suite. I'm your host, Ellen Williams, founder of The Salient Strategist and author of Creating Time, the Key to Productivity and Peace. Today's topic is the importance of having business process to support growth instead of relying too heavily on the we'll figure it out mentality. My guest is Adam Hamadache, founder and CEO of Formula. He is a proven business builder, leader, and digital strategist. He has deep expertise in both growing companies and navigating the evolving intersection of AI, SEO, and hospitality. He's helped clients grow revenue, build high-performing teams, and systematize success, making him a go-to voice for anyone looking to scale with clarity and purpose. Adam is also a leading thinker on the future of AI, search, and digital transformation within hospitality, with insights that translate across industries. He has delivered main stage keynotes at High Tech USA, the independent hotel show, and technology in hospitality. Whether discussing agency building or tech adoption, Adam cuts through the noise with actionable, high-impact advice. Welcome, Adam, to this episode of Time to Press Pause.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks for having me.
That's my pleasure. I'm excited to hear your press pause story, and it's been nice meeting you. So please share your press pause story with us.
Sure. My press pause story is back to the COVID period. I run a digital marketing agency, and I had just had a little girl, my first child. So we had her in November of 2019. I took a couple of months off. I was able to sort of got my business to a place where I had a brilliant management team and everyone did a brilliant job for our clients. And we were in a really good place in business. You know, we were the biggest revenue and profit levels that we'd ever seen, and things were going really well. I came back to work in January and worked for about 3 or 4 weeks. And then I went off to Australia for 3 weeks, or at least that was the intention. So we had 2 weddings. 2 weeks apart, completely different friends. It just so happened that those 2 weddings fell within 2 weeks of each other. So we flew over with our then 3-month-old daughter, and we went to the first wedding. It was wonderful. Went to the second wedding, and that was when things started turning. And Australia had very similar timeline to the rest of the world in terms of when lockdown started, etc. And most of our business is in the UK, or at least it was back then. And so it was that week leading up to the Saturday wedding when things really started turning in terms of, lockdowns were announced, and my business works with lots of hotels. So obviously, hospitality was one of those kind of first areas to be kind of locked down and told you cannot open. And so what was supposed to be this kind of like really fun wedding week turned into, obviously with the time zones, my evenings when everybody went off to dinner was fielding calls from clients and saying, you know what, I'm really sorry, we've got to pause, we can't do this, we can't do that. I was seeing, direct debits being cancelled, getting those notifications. It was like watching my business kind of implode in front of my eyes. And kind of to bring this back to that pause moment, obviously we all know what happened thereafter. Hotels couldn't open. We had lots of different schemes in the UK, like you could furlough your staff. I'm sure you had something similar in the US where you could obviously, you get basically their salary covered by the government. And then we took a bounce back loan and all these sorts of things. But what it basically turned out was that, we lost 75% of our revenue that week. And that small 25% stuck around and kept us in business, and we were very grateful for that. But all the hotels were closed. I furloughed all of my team except for one, my most senior, and she sort of ran the show, and it wasn't really a full-time job because there wasn't a great deal to do. So I was sort of stuck in this most beautiful place on the Sunshine Coast in Australia, which coming from near London, it was nice to not, there are places where it doesn't rain every day. I didn't know. So that was quite nice to have this wonderful tropical climate. I had this relatively newborn baby, and I couldn't work. I'd jump on for an hour or so a day and just couldn't really do anything. And it was probably the first time I started in business when I was 25, and that was the first time that I'd actually stopped and couldn't work and actually paused in my life. So it was amazing to, challenging, but it was an amazing experience to have been through that and just seen how powerful that pause could be, even if it was, not of my own making.
So that was very interesting. Certainly, many of us paused during COVID. A couple questions. You said that you had gone for 2 weeks, but how long did you wind up there for the lockdown?
So we were there for 5 months in total.
5 months.
Yeah. So our flight got cancelled. And actually it was, if you wanted to get out, you could. But my partner was on maternity leave, obviously, with our newborn baby. I can work from anywhere. So we were like, do you know what? We're going to stay. And we were in an Airbnb, and the guy who obviously ran his property as an Airbnb, all of his forward bookings cancelled because nobody could travel. So he did us a really good rate. And so we ended up just me, my partner Katie, and our newborn baby in this enormous villa with a pool for a very, very reduced rate. So it was actually, for a time, it felt like we were winning a lockdown, like this is working out. So we were very lucky in that regard. But yeah, it was a really wonderful time. We stayed there until sort of, I think we came home in August, and yeah, just had the most wonderful experience as a result. So yeah, it was great.
Awesome. So you had also said that it was the first time that you had taken a pause and you realized how powerful it was. Can you dive into that a little bit about why it was powerful?
Yeah, I think, where the business, obviously, I mentioned we were in a good place. Sales were going up. We had a brilliant management team. Profit was there. So the numbers were all in a really strong place, but it was almost like everything was wobbling. We were just in that sort of place where, I was asking perhaps too much of my team. Or we've got another client. Can we squeeze them in? Can we do a bit more? And I think that was on reflection, a sort of a bad leadership from me to sort of keep pushing when actually I was sort of considering the needs of the business rather than the needs of my team. So that was certainly a reflection point. And actually, that pause, what it allowed me to do was to consider that, we've got to make changes. It's almost like the cup analogy, like the capacity is this, but actually if you go to a bigger cup, then your capacity goes significantly greater. And I think where we were sort of pouring water into an already very full cup. And in order to, obviously this cup analogy is really about processes, efficiency, really understanding how we do what we do on a repeatable scale. And that was where this pause was so significant for me, because I realized that actually if we don't take this time, you don't see the wood for the trees. You're trapped in the weeds, and you might want to consider in that idea. But taking that time to pause, to step back and actually say, what's not working? Why is this not working? And I'm sort of at the moment, and certainly back then, I'm sort of fascinated by this idea that somebody has solved pretty much every problem in business that you face. There are real rare cases where you've got a very unique problem, and actually it's just about saying, okay, this problem of, how do we manage capacity and consistency of delivery and all these sort of challenging things that you face in everyday business. Somebody solve that. We need to work out how. And for us, the EOS system, the book Traction was really amazing for that. The entrepreneurial operating system, for those that don't know, it's just, I think there was a line on the back of the book that says, how about you start running your business rather than your business running you? But that concept totally resonated. I was like, yes, that's what we need. So we started to implement that, and that made a big difference. So it was that moment to step back and be like, hey, what's not working here? Let's work out how we fix this and actually go to work on it, rather than just kind of rushing constantly, fighting fires and doing more deals. And, it's crazy when I look back at how we were running the business.
I think that's not unique.
Sure.
Growth has, growing pains is a real thing in business. You had me at processes and efficiency, because that's what I do for a living. I help people get unstuck. I help people understand where their processes are working and where there's room for improvement. And then I marry that with technologies. Do you have the right technologies? Do you need a different technology? So I am all about process and documentation. What I found interesting was the fact that you had this opportunity to reflect, and you had clarity in a lot of what you were explaining. So I have a question. Did you feel like you were pouring water in a full cup while you were doing?
Yes. And I felt I would take the analogy even further and say, I couldn't see how full the cup was. We lacked that transparency to understand whether we could actually feasibly take on a new project. And half the time it was, well, they want to pay, they want to work with us. That's a tick. They want to pay us, a reasonable sum for doing the work. That's another tick. Let's figure out and make it work. Jumping off the diving board and figuring it out on the way down. That was very much my sort of approach, which, as obviously sounds ridiculous, but that's what I was doing. And I think often at times I look back, I've been in business for myself now since 2013. I look back at those early days and there was no guide to take you from that one-man band sort of, hustle culture that you needed to get you to where you want to be. And at some point, that ethos is just not sufficient anymore to get you to that next stage. At some point, you need to mature as a company. And I think, my COVID stories I've shared today, that was the tipping point. It made me realize in a very positive way, actually, that I need to sort of mature as a leader, as a business owner. And, we need to have much better understanding about what business we're in, what we can feasibly do and what we can't. So yeah, that was a real positive.
I agree. I have been an entrepreneur and an employee off and on throughout my whole career. Pretty much a solo entrepreneur every time. And how many times have you heard not only yourself say this, but others, we'll figure it out?
Yeah.
Right. Which is one thing you said, we'll figure it out. And that's great. If something new comes along, a new opportunity that's not a big shiny object, but something that's actually going to be a fit for your organization. But certainly the best way to be able to figure it out is to have an operating system or a plan for your business in the first place. So can you tell us how implementing EOS changed the way you approach business?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I'd say that one of the big changes is the weekly pulse meeting that we have as a team. So, there was never really probably the most tangible benefit of the EOS system is half the time when there was an issue, I would call my managing director or she would call me and we'd talk about the problem for probably half an hour. We're taking big chunks out of each other's day. Now it goes into the pulse document for discussion as an issue. And there's a framework around discussing that issue. So you identify it, you define it or discuss it and then solve it, and you get all members of your team involved in that process. But, that's a small example of having a system to deal with the issues that arise. And, issues will always arise. So I feel that was really useful. And also, they're big advocates in the EOS system of having a scorecard. I still remember when I read the book some years ago now, but it talked about the scorecard is a sort of almost look at it like a dashboard on your car and of warning lights. And you could be on a beach somewhere and you could jump into your scorecard and see if there are any warning lights in your business based around those kind of very small select group of metrics that give you a clear understanding where your business is. And that now is something we look at every week. And then if there are any warning lights that come on, it gets raised as an issue and we tackle it together. So just having that process for dealing with the fires is game changing. It has been for us, at least.
A process for dealing with the fires. So from what you explained, have you reduced the number of fires?
Well, that's I suppose the added benefit is that, when you stop, the idea that you're constantly firefighting is because you lack the processes. And so therefore you're spending so much time reacting to those fires. It's a long process because every business can be quite complicated, but over time you start to reduce the amount of issues or fires, and therefore you have a process to tackle the fires, but you also start to see the fires reduce or decline in their severity. It's not like, there are always going to be issues. This client wanted this, but they've got this. Okay, how do we tackle that? But they're not, sort of, God, this is like game changing. This could be disastrous. We're going to run out of cash in 3 days. How are we going to take, we don't have those types of issues perhaps that we might have done previously. So yeah, I'd say that's been a big step too.
I'm glad to hear that you're the proponent of systems and everything you said. I suspect that in addition to having fewer fires, you probably are able to sort of head them off at the pass, right? See them coming before they happen and make sure that they don't. So I'm excited to hear about processes and systems because that's totally up my alley. So I have one last question for you, Adam. What advice do you have for leaders as to when they would identify it's time to press pause, especially since your pause wasn't something that you chose to do?
Yeah, I think, look, pause is basically the power to recharge, I would say, whether that's of your own making or forced, like in my situation. When I was growing my business, I was not going to fail. I was, working all hours and I was doing everything I possibly could. You hustle, right? And certainly in the early days, admittedly, before I had kids. So it's a bit of a bigger challenge these days. But it's so powerful to take proper time off and proper disconnect time. And obviously that might not always happen. There might be something that needs me, but just getting time to properly recharge. And then, because what I want that sort of extra energy, cognitive energy that you sort of it's so similar, I think, in terms of your cognitive fatigue, in terms of as well as your sort of muscular fatigue. Like if you go to the gym a lot, if you overtrain, you start to actually, in terms of the gym wise, you start to go backwards. You just hit a plateau and you cannot move forward. And I think it's the same cognitively as well. You need that proper time to, just stop using those kind of problem solving part of the brain that you do on a daily basis. Have that time, and then what sort of emerges is higher motivation when you're ready to go back in and fresh perspective. The pause is now an essential part of my year, and I try to orchestrate multiple pauses over the course of a calendar year because I think it makes such a big difference.
Wow, what a tremendous lesson that you had a pause thrust upon you, and now it's just part of your system, your process. I love that you talked about it being a way to recharge and get a fresh perspective and a little more motivation. I certainly agree with that. But I really love the fact that you talked about cognitive fatigue, right? How much can we really think and problem solve and have the energy to continue to do that? It's funny. I just finished writing the book and I've been writing it for a while and now it's in the hands of my editor and I don't know what to do with myself. It's like, I've been thinking about the book and all these different sections and how I want to write it. And then I did all the writing and now it was almost like planning my wedding, right? The day after the wedding was like, I don't have to think about planning my wedding anymore. Right. So this has been great, Adam. Thank you so much for sharing not only your pause, but all the great things that came out of having that pause. And it sounds like you have more than one kid now?
There's two of them now. Yes, two very happy young children.
Fabulous. Well, again, thank you for being here today. It was really great hearing your story.
Thanks for having me, Ellen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Time to Press Pause. If you're interested in learning more about Adam, visit thisisformula.com. If you're interested in learning more about me, visit thesalientstrategist.com. And please look for my book, Creating Time, The Key to Productivity and Peace, at your favorite online bookstore. And please listen again wherever you listen to your podcasts.